Okay, hi then, Year 10. Here's your next lesson on Macbeth, and today we're going to be having a very, very close look at Macbeth Act 2, Scene 1. I think that this video alone, there's enough for about 3 lessons worth of studying. So you probably won't want to watch it all the way through. You will probably want to chunk it into about 3 different sections, and try and time yourself so you're working for about 40 minutes on each section. Then at the end, I've set you an assignment to do, which is either a very, very detailed paragraph, or if you want to challenge yourself, a whole essay question. And you should be well equipped to do the whole essay at the end of this lesson, this very long and very detailed lesson. Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do in a second is check that you've got your copy of Macbeth in front of you, ready to annotate and to make some notes. A little bit later in this lesson, when we look at Macbeth's soliloquy, there are going to be masses of notes. So what you may well want to do is look in the details and download a copy of Act 2, Scene 1, and maybe the third page of that, maybe make 3 or 4 copies of it, because the notes are going to be that detailed. It's a really important speech that Macbeth makes, and there's absolutely stacks of information in there for you. Okay, but before we get on with kind of discussing this scene, what I want you to do is to click again on the link which is in the description on the Spark Notes No Fear Shakespeare. On the screen it says read through the first half of Act 2, Scene 1. I think it would be well worth your while reading through the whole of that scene. Read it first in the Shakespeare on the left, and then secondly read it in the modern version on the right, and that should really help to orientate yourselves within the text and to understand what is going on. When you've read through the scene, Act 2, Scene 1, what I'd like you to do is to then find the next link and click on this video, and you can see the screenshot from the video above. Basically what it is, it looks like it might be a teacher and a student, and they're role playing the roles of Banquo and Fleance, and as if they're on a TV chat show or a news show, that kind of thing. And they're really picking the beginning of the scene apart. What I'd like you to do is to watch through that, watch it the first time and just try and get the gist of what's going on. And then the second time you watch it, have the beginning of Act 2, Scene 1 in front of you and try and find the quotations that they're discussing and get those annotated down. So what they're talking about and what those things mean as they discuss that with the interviewer. You may need to watch it a third time to get those notes down. Okay, so I'll just give you a second to pause this video and to click on, first of all, the Spark Notes, and then secondly, the video that you can see the screen grab from above. Okay, so what I did is I watched that scene and I made some notes based on what they were discussing. So this is how the scene goes. Enter Banquo and Fleance. Fleance is carrying a torch, and it's like what I call quite a domestic scene. So it's like a father and a son, and they're staying together in Macbeth's castle. It's kind of like a strange place. They're staying somewhere they're not used to, not at home. And Banquo is like, what time is it, Fleance? How goes the night, boy? The moon is down. I have not heard the clock, Banquo says, and she goes down at 12. Fleance, I takes tis later, sir. Banquo says, hold, wait a minute. Take my sword. There's husbandry in heaven. Their candles are all out. Take thee that too. So Banquo is going to give in all his stuff to Fleance there. A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way in repose. So let's have a look at what the guys on the screen talked about for that little bit. When Banquo says she, just here, he's talking about the moon. So she, the moon, has been personified here, and he says the moon goes down at midnight. And Fleance says, well, I can tell you one thing, Dad, it's later than midnight. It's later than that already. This is cute. He calls his dad's really respectful relationship there. And so, as I said, Banquo is kind of taking off his sword and things like that and handing his bits and bobs to Fleance. And he says, a heavy summons lies like lead upon me. And we've got a little simile there, which basically means I have dark thoughts on my mind. He says, yet I would not sleep. So he doesn't want to go to sleep because he can control his thoughts when he's awake, but when he goes to sleep, those thoughts are really troublesome to him. And you kind of get the impression from what happens later on that actually he's thinking about the witches and he's having bad dreams about meeting the witches. So he's got this like terrible sense that they're causing trouble. And then onto the stage comes Macbeth and his servant, and again Macbeth's carrying a torch too, and Banquo calls out, give me my sword, who's there? And this is quite paranoid. So you'd think that from what we know already, Macbeth and Banquo were quite close when they were on the battlefield together. But Banquo clearly does not feel safe in Macbeth's castle. He probably hasn't realised it's Macbeth yet. So he's arming himself immediately using that imperative verb. Give me my sword, who's there? You kind of get this sense of paranoia, which I guess you can understand, seeing as the Norwegians and the Scots have been trying to track down and kill Duncan and his army. So you can understand why he's paranoid, but then it is fixed to Macbeth's home as well. So yeah, definitely some paranoia from Banquo there. And why does he want the sword? Well, it seems like he feels like he's going to have to defend himself. Okay, so in this bit, Banquo says, what, sir, not yet at rest? The king's abed. He's been an unusual pleasure and sent forth great largesse to your officers. This diamond he greets your wife withal by the name of most kind hostess, and shut up in measureless content. Being unprepared, our will become the servant to defect, which else should free have wrought. So you can see here, the guys in the video didn't discuss this, but Banquo is calling Macbeth, so he's been really respectful towards him. And he also uses the formal version of you, which is you, not thee. So it's not thine officers, it's your officers, your wife. And this is nice. Duncan seems to have given Lady Macbeth a beautiful present, a diamond. I should imagine that would probably make Macbeth feel slightly more guilty again about killing King Duncan, the fact that he's been so generous in accepting Lady Macbeth's hospitality. Anyway, a little bit off the point there. Banquo's like, what's her not yet at rest? And the guys in the video discuss this. Banquo is extremely suspicious and Macbeth is still up. He's like, why hasn't Macbeth gone to bed yet? That's odd. So he's questioning that, shows his suspicions, and that will kind of trigger Macbeth, and Macbeth would realise. So just back to this last point there, why is Banquo being so respectful towards Banquo? Is it because he fears Macbeth? So he knows that Macbeth has become Thane of Cawdor, and he's thinking, well, how does Macbeth think that he's going to become king? Or is it because he's Macbeth's guest, Macbeth staying in his house? So as Macbeth's host, he should show respect. Then it gets a little bit more personal, or does it? Banquo says, all's well. I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you, they have shown some truth. And I put here, is Banquo sharing his worries, or is he testing Macbeth? So is he kind of feeling out Macbeth to find out if he wants to make that whole king thing true, if he is excited about the prophecy now? When he says to you they've shown some truth, it's because obviously Macbeth immediately became the Thane of Cawdor, didn't he? Macbeth says, I think not of them. Really? I think he does think of them, doesn't he? Well, we know that he does, don't we? Because he wrote to Lady Macbeth about it immediately. Anyway, he goes on to say, yet, when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business if you'd grant the time. So Macbeth is saying, okay, when we've got a little bit more time in the future, let's actually talk about that business. Let's talk about those witches. And it's quite vague talk, isn't it? He doesn't say the weird sisters. He doesn't say the business. It's a little bit like the murder, which he calls the assassination or the deed and so many things, but he won't call it the murder. Similarly, he doesn't want to call the witches or the weird sisters, whatever. And this is quite a kind of a touchy little discussion, because it is like Banquo's trying to work out what Macbeth's thinking, and then Macbeth wants to know what Banquo's thinking. Is Macbeth testing him here? If you shall cleave to my consent, when 'tis it shall make honour for you. He's and basically what this means is, if you will follow my lead when the time comes, there'll be something in it for you. You're going to gain something by it. It shall make honour for you. And you can see there that Macbeth has also referred to Banquo as you. So they're keeping up these levels of formality, which is really weird when they fought shoulder to shoulder against the Norwegians and against the Scottish rebels. And now all of a sudden they're being super formal to each other, using all these formal address terms and lots of yous rather than these. Banquo answers, so I lose none. So he says, yeah, I will follow your lead if you don't make me do anything dishonourable. I want to keep a clear conscience, my bosom franchised and allegiance clear. I shall be counselled. He's kind of like, I'll wait for instructions though. Yes, I will follow you, but not if you make me do anything bad or anything that's going to make me lose honour. I'm not going to do you. And I've just put up here, I think that that's the wrong answer. That's not what Macbeth wanted to hear. Interestingly, in the real history of Macbeth, which is told by a historian called Holinshed, Banquo and Macbeth plotted to kill King Duncan together, and they were in it together. So you can imagine in the real story, this conversation would have gone very, very differently. But why did Shakespeare change Holinshed's true history? Well, it's because he doesn't want Banquo to look dishonourable, because, as you should all know, Banquo is a distant ancestor of King James I of Scotland and England. So he wants Banquo to be really, really honourable. That's the way that he flatters King James. Okay, so anyway, they tie up this conversation. Good repose the while. Thanks, the like to you. So Macbeth says, sleep well. And Banquo says, yeah, you sleep well too. And off the pair of them go. Macbeth also gets rid of his servant now as well. And he says, go bid thy mistress, when my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell and get thee to bed. So this is a message to Lady Macbeth, a reminder to Lady Macbeth that the servant is being asked to deliver. When my drink is ready, she strike upon the bell. But actually, what we know already and what we find out later when we hear the bell ring is actually she's going to ring the bell when the coast is clear and Macbeth can go unhampered through to murder King Duncan. So actually he's kind of sending a coded message via the servant. Lady Macbeth will know what that reminder means, and that's going to be his cue to head off to kill King Duncan. So if you need to wind this video back a little bit, make sure you've got all those notes done, pause it on this page and make sure you've got all those annotations down and that you understand that scene fully, please. Okay, what we are going to think about now is a little bit of technicality. So we're going to be thinking about AO2, and specifically for AO2 we're going to be thinking about analysing the rhythms of Shakespeare's language, and this kind of rhythm that Shakespeare writes in that we're going to be thinking about now also kind of trickles into AO3. AO3 is about social and historical context, but that can also include literary heritage and the history of the genre of drama. So where drama and the way that dramas are written come from. And you can see this man in the picture, and he's going da-dum, 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 da-dum. And that is what we are going to be thinking about. It is known as iambic pentameter. And here is some key vocabulary for you. So that's the first one, iambic pentameter. And then a little bit later, we're going to be thinking about how iambic pentameter becomes blank verse. So it's in technical language here. This is the kind of stuff that you need to be writing about if you want to get those top grades. So if you want to get into the mark scheme level 6 for AQA, which means that the result you'd come out with would be a GCSE grade 8 or 9. You need to be able to talk about the rhythm of the language, but also the rhythm of the language leads us to interesting stuff too, as you will see. So we've done iambic pentameter before, but this is going to be a detailed recap. So first of all, this weird word, iamb. It's a Greek word because ancient Greece is where theatre started, and where poetry started, and all sorts of things like that. And iamb is known as a poetic foot, and it consists of one unstressed followed by a stressed syllable. So the man before, on the previous picture, said dadum. I always say didum. The word hello is an iamb, so no stress on the h, but then the stress goes on to low, hello. And then the next bit is the meter. And the meter is another word for rhythm, really, but more specifically here, it's the number of times this foot, this iamb, is repeated. So here you can see it's a pentameter. And you'll know from pentagons and pentagrams, those with stars that you can draw, that pent is a word which means 5. So in iambic pentameter, there are 5 feet. Didum, 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 didum. Some poets in the anthology use iambic pentameter, and the two that came to the top of my mind are My Last Duchess and Ozymandias. So if you think, I met a traveller from an antique land, or My Last Duchess. There's My Last Duchess standing on the wall, painted on the wall, sorry. There's My Last Duchess painted on the wall. So they both use the iambic pentameter in their poems. It's a really, really well used rhythm in poetry, and also in what's known as Renaissance drama. So it wasn't just Shakespeare who was writing in this verse. Why is the iambic pentameter used? Well, Shakespeare's characters, particularly those who are powerful, tend to use the iambic pentameter to speak, especially in formal situations. And here's our second definition. If you get line after line after line of unrhymed iambic pentameter, this is known as blank verse. So it's verse because you've got that rhythm, but it's blank because there's not a single rhyme to be found in there. So we would definitely not say that My Last Duchess and Ozymandias are written in blank verse, because they both follow really, really tight rhyme schemes. My Last Duchess, every 2 lines are heroic couplets, and in Ozymandias it follows the rhyme scheme of an Italian sonnet. So those two, not blank verse. However, in Shakespeare, someone like Macbeth doing a soliloquy, he talks in blank verse. You just might get a rhyming couplet at the end, so the actor playing Macbeth knows that that's the end of his speech. Okay, so line after line of unrhymed iambic pentameter is called blank verse. A little bit more detail about that. Sometimes if you're in the exam situation, you're like, I know it's really important to be able to say, is it prose, like normal talk, or is it blank verse? How am I going to tell the difference? So there are a couple of tricks that you can do. So the first thing that you can do is, if every line starts with a capital letter, when you look down the left, then you can be pretty sure that that's written in verse. So if you look down the left on the script and every single line starts with a capital letter, it's probably verse. And then if you go into the text and just count out the syllables, and there's approximately 10 syllables per line, then you can pretty well bet your bottom dollar that that's going to be iambic pentameter, and you could probably make it go to dum 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 dum. Okay, so a little more information on why Shakespeare uses iambic pentameter. First of all, da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. It sounds like a heartbeat. And you'll find that when we read the soliloquies normally are in iambic pentameter, not just in Macbeth, but in all of Shakespeare's plays. Not always, but often, mostly in iambic pentameter. And if you remember last time when we talked about soliloquies, I said they're telling the truth, they're talking from the heart. So that's kind of the idea. The other reason, which kind of goes with that, is when we talk naturally, because our heartbeat drives everything we do, we naturally talk in a kind of an iambic rhythm. Probably won't be a pentameter, but it is that dum dum dum. Like, it's kind of quite a rhythmic way of talking. It sounds quite like natural human speech. The second reason is because the dum dum dum, it creates quite a driving rhythm. Shakespeare's plays, when you see them printed down, they're kind of long, and nowadays if you see a production, it might go on for quite a long time. However, if you went to see a Shakespeare play back in Shakespeare's day, where you're not worried about the grammar and some of the vocab not being understood by the audience, the plays would absolutely whiz past, and it was very rare that one of Shakespeare's plays would take longer than 2 hours to perform. This da-dum almost sounds like a galloping horse. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. And it is a really driving pace that keeps the speech and the narrative going along at a cracking pace, kind of really drives the pace of the story. So that's another reason why Shakespeare and other Renaissance playwrights used that particular rhythm. The third reason why Shakespeare and other Renaissance writers used blank verse is because it has the effect of elevating the language, and it can show a character's status and reflects the formality of the situation. So in Macbeth, we know that the witches talk a little bit in a trochaic tetrameter, so that really differentiates them very unnatural rhythms from the very natural rhythms of the iambic. However, most of the people in Macbeth, apart from those witches, are high status characters, and the high status characters are talking to each other in formal situations. So most of Macbeth is in blank verse. However, some of Shakespeare's other plays, you can see it working differently. There's a play called As You Like It, and half of As You Like It is set in court, so like in a royal palace, like in a ducal palace. And when they're in the palace, they all speak in the elevated language and the rhythms of blank verse. But then lots of those people kind of flee to the countryside, and when they're living the simple life of the country, they speak in normal language, in prose. So just like normal Shakespearean people, Elizabethan people would have done back in the day. Another play, which some of you might have studied in year 8, is called Much Ado About Nothing. And although they're quite formal people, they're quite posh people, they are all relaxing at Leonato's country retreat. And because they're all relaxing, again, in the countryside, and lots of kind of wine and food is involved, there's actually virtually no blank verse at all in that particular play, because it's set in a really, really casual setting. So everyone is just talking in prose, except for a couple of very formal exchanges, maybe between Beatrice and the prince, for example. But as I said, in Macbeth, because most of the people are noble and most of the situations are very formal, we see this elevated language. So number 3 just there, and that's what that is all about. So if you want to pause the video for a moment and make some notes there, if you think you've got it, just carry on watching. Okay, here's a little task for you. So when you get a read through this, have a think. Is it prose or is it blank verse? So here are the 2 little tricks for working it out. Does each line start with a capital letter on the left? If it does, probably verse. Can you count approximately 10 syllables per line? Yeah, it's probably verse then, specifically iambic pentameter. Is it just normal? Does it just kind of run on? Is it a posh character or is it a casual, rough character who's speaking out? Okay, so these 2 are from these 2 speeches, both from Act 3, Scene 2, so a little on from what we're doing at the moment. Pause, work out which one's prose and which one is blank verse, and I shall tell you the answer in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you worked it out. It's nice and easy. If you have a look at Macduff, Macduff is quite an important person. He's come to wake up the king. We've got approach with see, ring, Banquo shake, and the as to. Capital letters there, even though some of those are just halfway through a sentence. See the, okay, so you see all those capitals there. And then you start counting some of the syllables. Approach the chamber and destroy your sight. With a new gorgon, do not bid me speak. Thank you, Macduff. You've demonstrated my point beautifully. So we've got this lovely iambic pentameter. Hopefully you can see here as well that we've got a little stage direction interrupting this line. See and then speak yourselves awake, awake. So even though they come in the middle of his line, he still manages to keep that iambic pentameter going. Okay, and then you can see as well, sight, speak, selves, wake, treason, awake, counterfeit, see, Banquo, sprites, and bell. It doesn't rhyme, so it's unrhymed iambic pentameter, blank verse. Here's the porter. He's a really rough character. He's a drunken porter. His only job is to open the gates, and he can't manage that because he's too drunk or hungover or a bit of both. He's not a posh character at all. And he just talks in normal early modern English. Obviously, we don't talk like this nowadays, early modern English. Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Howgate, he should have old turn in the key. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there in the name of Beelzebub? Here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Come in time, have napkins now about you. Here you'll sweat for it. So he's just talking in normal English. As I said, not normal how we talk today, but it's just normal prose. And that's all it is. So Macduff, blank verse, porter, prose. Hopefully you got that. If you're not sure, put a comment underneath and I'll see if I can explain that a bit better. Okay, so moving on to the second half of Act 2, Scene 1. And as you know, we've been through the play several times already. We've been through the play once to look at all the supernatural happenings in the play. We've been through the play twice to look at all of Lady Macbeth's influence and her story through the play. And now we're kind of going through Macbeth's greatest hits. And most of Macbeth's greatest hits are soliloquies. And this is a really famous soliloquy, otherwise known as "Is this a dagger I see before me?" So what I want you to do before we move on is to write down the definition of the word soliloquy, which we studied in the video 3 that I did with you. So see if, without looking at your notes, you can remember what a soliloquy is, jot it down, and then be ready to check your answer in one moment. Here it is. Okay, so this is what you should have written down last lesson, hopefully got close to it today. So a soliloquy is a monologue where a character speaks to him or herself. They're not meant to be heard by other characters, or at the moment there's no other characters on stage anyway. This speech reveals his or her innermost thoughts to the audience. In Shakespeare's plays, characters reveal their true feelings in soliloquies. So that's what a soliloquy is, and that's what we're going to be seeing now. What I would like to do with this soliloquy is just start off with going through a little bit of what he's talking about, what it's meaning, what some of the key vocabulary means. Okay, so we'll do that first. I'll do a quick read through. So this is how it goes. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle towards my hand. Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshallest me the way that I was going, and such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fool of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade indulging gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now, o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf, whose howls his watch. Thus, with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, towards his design moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabout, and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. Whilst I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. A bell rings. Oh, no, we'll go back. So there's another little bit, but there's nothing really that I wanted to explain for that bit. We're going to kind of go through the scene like 3 different times. So if we have a look at this vocabulary here, the first word is fatal vision. Now, fatal normally means deadly. Here, I guess it does mean deadly because he is talking about going to kill King Duncan. But actually what it means is it's a vision which has been sent to him by the fates. So remember, Shakespeare's audience, the Jacobeans, they really, really believed in the wheel of fate, like the wheel of fortune, that everything that happened to you in life was predicted in the stars. And when Macbeth sees this dagger coming at him with a handle pointing towards him and the pointy bit pointing towards King Duncan, he thinks that it's a message from the fates, that is like his stars, his horoscope coming to send him a sign. So fatal means like of the fate or predicted by the stars. Okay, so that's the first bit. The next word you might not know is palpable. He says about this dagger, I can't touch you, but you look as if you're palpable. You look as if I could touch you. Palpable means touchable. Here it says, thou marshallest me the way. So marshallest means you guide me the way, you point me the way. So if you think about, the London Marathon or something, the marshals they make sure that the runners are going in the right direction and they can control the crowd. And it's the same idea going on here, that martialist me the way, he says. Then he can still see this imaginary dagger in front of him, but it changes. He says, I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood. The dudgeon is the dagger's wooden handle, and gouts of blood, which is a lovely word, well, a lovely horrible word, the large drops or big splashes of blood he can see now on the blade of the dagger. So basically, what we are getting in this section here is Macbeth saying, I can see a dagger, but when I try and touch it, I can't touch it. So clearly it is a dagger in the mind. It's in my head, it's some kind of vision. I'm trying to grab it, but I can't grab it. I can't get hold of it. But he's saying it's a fatal vision, and the handle is towards my hand. So it's like a sign. It's like a sign that me being meant to kill King Duncan is predicted for me in the stars, and I've got to go through with it. I can't escape my fate, and this is kind of telling me that I've got to go through with it. The fact that the dagger changes, the vision of the dagger changes, so it's got these big blobs of blood on it, persuades him even more, because it's showing him what he needs to do with the dagger. Yeah, he needs to draw blood. This little section here, he's seeing the imaginary dagger, and he's kind of going, yeah, imaginary dagger, you're reminding me that I need to draw my real dagger, because I'm going to need my real dagger at the ready to do the deed of killing King Duncan, the bloody business. Now, down here, he talks about pale Hecate, and we'll talk more about her a little bit later, but just to remind you that Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft. Down here it talks about withered murder. Withered murder is alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf. And the way that we probably interpret that nowadays is, oh, the wolf has made me jump, it's alarmed me. But actually, alarmed, it doesn't quite mean that here. To be alarmed is a call to action. So it's like the wolf howls, and this character of withered murder knows that he needs to go about his task, because a wolf has kind of said, oi, murder, get on with it. Okay, so again, this metaphor or personification actually of murder, we will talk about that more in a minute. Tarquin, this is a horrible story. He was a king of Rome, and he raped a young lady called Lucretia. And Shakespeare actually wrote a long poem about the rape of Lucretia. That's what it's called. When he published Macbeth, Rape of Lucretia had been published for a long time. It was a famous and popular poem. And it famously really, really draws out Tarquin's ravishing strides as he goes to her bedchamber to go and do the dirty deed. So that's kind of almost like an intertextual link that Shakespeare's used there to a story that his audience would have known anyway, but kind of really thinking about how he'd kind of elongated this stride of this horrible king of Rome as he goes to rape the woman that he fancies. Okay, and then the last word that I've got highlighted for you is this word prate. So Macbeth says he's afraid that thy very stones prate of my whereabouts. So he's talking about walking on the earth. He's worried about the sound of his footsteps. And again, we'll talk more about that and analyse that more. But prate means to kind of gossip about. So he's worried that the stones he's walking on the ground are going to give him away. They're going to talk of his whereabouts and give him away. Okay, now hopefully you kind of understand roughly what's going on in that speech now. So now seems like a really, really good time to watch someone good performing this speech. So what I'd like you to do for me, please, is to pause, stop this video, and to look in the link, which you'll find in the details below, and watch Patrick Stewart doing this speech. I think he does it brilliantly, but he does do a kind of a cringy little wolf howl in the middle of it. As when the wolf howls, he actually howls it out loud, and that's a little bit weird. So if you can stop this one, watch Patrick Stewart, but also kind of follow along, half watching and half following along in your script as he performs this soliloquy, please. Okay, so we're going to have our second look through the soliloquy. And this time, I'm really looking at stagecraft. Shakespeare is a cunning writer. You'll probably notice when we study another play that there'll be way more stage directions. Any of you who do drama will know that any modern play or any Victorian play or whatever, they have actually stacks of stage directions telling actors what kind of voice to use, whereabouts to move. At the beginning, it tells you what costume to wear. You get descriptions what the characters are meant to look like. Shakespeare, nothing. So what he tends to do is embed his stage directions inside the play. There's a really good reason for this. Theatre wasn't the same as it was in our days. So nowadays, for example, you could go up to London and say you wanted to go and see Les Miserables or something. It would be on maybe on a 6-month run in one theatre, or actually something like Les Miserables. It's probably been on for 3 years in the same theatre. So all the actors and the singers are doing is performing the same play about something like 8 times a week. They have their Sundays off. They do 6 evening performances and 2 matinee performances in the afternoon, and that's all they do for however many months they're doing the theatre run. In Shakespeare's time, they'd be putting on a different play every day of the week, and the more plays that he wrote, the more kind of plays they'd have to cycle round. So it's a bit like when you watch like Netflix, or you just watch the normal telly. The programs are always there, and if you've got a favourite film or a favourite TV programme, you can watch it or rewatch it, and that's the way it used to work. So Shakespeare's audience would have a variety. Now the actors were brilliant, and they would hold all the lines in their head from goodness knows however many plays. Sometimes an actor would have a small part in one play, but then a leading role in another play, so that you'd have fewer lines to learn. So the reason why Shakespeare embedded the stage directions into the language was kind of almost like as a memory jogger for the actor. So they're actually saying the line, and the line tells them how to act. And you're really going to see that in this particular scene. We'll have a look at these kind of embedded stage directions, these implicit stage directions here. So here it goes. Is this a dagger which I see before me? I haven't even highlighted this, but it starts straight away. Is it a dagger? So he's got to imagine he's got a dagger there in front of him, hasn't he? The handle towards my hand. He's still telling him how to act. Come, let me clutch thee. So we've got that imperative verb here, and he's kind of saying to the dagger, come here, come here. I want to try. And this, let me clutch thee, it's telling the actor to try and grab this dagger of the mind. But then the actor has to say, have thee not? So the actor, maybe he hasn't done Macbeth for a few weeks, he remembers, oh, I can't actually feel the dagger, it's not actually there. So he's kind of grabbing it, but not getting hold of it. So that's the first one here. Now, I just talked about Iambic, pentameter, and blank verse. And if you read through this, you'll find it's about 10 or 11 beats on most lines. You've got some feminine endings going on, which kind of elongating some of the lines to 11 to make Macbeth sound a bit weak. But this line's really interesting because, again, we haven't got 10 beats. So by not using 10 beats, Shakespeare is embedding a stage direction in for the actor. So he's going, I see thee yet in form as palpable as this, which now I draw. So you've only got 6 syllables there. So what happens for the next 4 syllables when nothing. The actor has got to wait out the beat. As this which now I draw, do dum, do dum. It gives him about a second or a second and a half to act on this stage direction. He's got to kind of pat himself down and find that dagger, the real dagger, which he's got to draw. It's almost like the fake dagger, the dagger of the mind, is reminding him that he's got to get ready his real dagger. Where's he put it? It just gives him that second to find his real dagger by embedding this silence, by taking 4 beats out of the rhythm there. Okay. This here is the real dagger. So I'll just put this here. The actor uses the pause to grab his real dagger. Okay, now here, and we've got a few of these actually, you can track them, but I picked out this one in particular. I see these still. So if you have a look here, the actor knows that he must continue looking at the imaginary dagger. It kind of fades out and then it fades back in again, and he knows that he needs to carry on looking at it. And here, on thy blade and dudgeon, gouts of blood, which was not so before. So I've just put here again, it gives the actor there the opportunity to show horror, that the dagger of the mind, the imaginary dagger, is covered in blood. Or maybe he could smile at the blood as if it's reminding him he's got to do this thing. So it depends how the actor wants to interpret Macbeth's character. But again, the fact that now this dagger has appeared again and is covered in blood this time. And that is giving this implicit direction to the actor, telling him how to act. Okay, and it carries on. Okay, so we got that bit. So I've highlighted howls, and I talked about that, and hopefully you've watched the Patrick Stewart version of it. Now I've put the actor Patrick Stewart howls this line, the wolf who's howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace. What did you think the effect of him howling was? What meaning did you think it created? For me, it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And for me, it definitely made me question how right Macbeth is in the mind, because he didn't come across as okay. It did make me question his sanity with which he was doing this. So that was the impact it had on me. It made me feel a bit uncomfortable, as if this Macbeth, Patrick Stewart's Macbeth, was a damaged man, someone who's not in the right state of mind to make good choices. Let's have a look. Now, Shakespeare also uses language techniques to really, really help his actors as well. In this bit, where it goes back to stealthy pace, actually, although I haven't, so even thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design, moves like a ghost. Hopefully you can see really clearly that sibilant effect, those repeated S and sh sounds through that. And basically that sibilant effect, the sibilance in that language, it kind of almost forces the actor to whisper, doesn't it? Why does Shakespeare want the actor to whisper those lines? Well, he's comparing murder, withered murder, to a rapist who's sneaking along to his victim's bedchamber to commit the crime. So you would want to whisper, you wouldn't want to be caught having made the decision to either commit murder or to commit rape, depending on whether you're taking the simile or the metaphor literally, or whether you're just saying it's a murder. But either way, you don't want to be caught, so you have to be shh, hush. So there it is, again, using the sounds of language to make these implicit stage directions to create meaning. I'm sure that I've told you this before, but in Shakespeare's day, you did not go to watch a play. You would go to hear a play. That's what was described. So any action or acting that happened was a bonus, really. It was all about the sounds of the language. And there Shakespeare is putting that sibilant effect in there. Okay, now if you have a look, we do have a proper stage direction here. A bell rings, and that would need to be in there because someone backstage would be ringing that bell. So that one does need to go there. That's not for the actor, that's for the person who's kind of doing all the props and the sound effects, the very few sound effects they were. And do you remember I talked earlier, I said Macbeth dismissed his servant saying, "Oh, tell your mistress to ring the bell when my drink is ready." And I said that was a signal, you know, as a coded message, wasn't it? So he hears the bell ring, and that's Lady Macbeth's signal. The coast is clear. You can go and do the murder now. Everyone's got to bed. You're safe. Off you go. And then the last little stage direction that's in here is like, how does the actor know when to leave the stage when it's finished? And here is a signal that Shakespeare uses. It is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. So Shakespeare often ends scenes with a rhyming couplet. It's a signal for the actor that that's the end of the scene and you should pop off now. It's also a signal to the audience as well. The audience would know that that's the end of that. However, what you may have noticed if you're really, really sharp is there's another rhyming couplet just here. He lives, whereas to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. So I think that is almost marking the end of this soliloquy, this kind of sequence here, because he goes from thinking about the dagger, the imaginary dagger, and about committing murder to thinking about King Duncan. So it's like this rhyming couplet wraps up the thoughts about the dagger of the mind. Then the bell rings and kind of reminds Macbeth what his purpose is, but also reminds the actor, no, you haven't finished yet, mate. And then you've got the proper rhyming couplet down here, now hell. That's a good word to finish on, isn't it? Hell. Okay. And he thinks there's a chance that's where Duncan might be going. Don't hear the bell, Duncan, because the ring of that bell means you could be off to hell in a minute. Okay. So that is hopefully helping you to see how very, very cleverly Shakespeare embeds these stage directions, these implicit stage directions, right into the text to help his Jacobean actors. Okay, I think it might be really, really useful to take a little break and re-watch that Patrick Stewart clip, or do a little internet search. Like I said, it's such a famous soliloquy, so you can maybe see if you can find the Ian McKellen version of that, and see how the different actors incorporate those implicit stage directions into their performance. Definitely Patrick Stewart would be worth watching again, but that could be your second or third time that you've seen it. So maybe do a little search and see if you can find Ian McKellen doing it. If you remember the Polanski film version, they had a really, really bad special effect, that kind of very early 1970s kind of special effect with a weird red floating dagger. I personally don't think that worked very well, but there, you know, he's got something that we can see to grab onto. But I think the whole point is no one can see this dagger except for Macbeth himself. Okay, what we're going to do now is some zooming in on the language. And I warn you now, there's a lot of personification going on in this scene. So if you remember earlier, I did say to you there was stacks of annotations to do, and you're seeing like we're on to our third layer now, and you can see how much there is here. So what you might want to do is print out another copy of this scene so that you can kind of have a separate bunch of analysis for the imagery and the language here. So let's have a look. He says, "Is this the dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Come, let me clutch thee, I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain?" So you see there three questions. So it's not just the one question, but it's kind of a whole row of questions, isn't it? And I think that these questions highlight Macbeth's uncertainty. Can you have a little think about what he's uncertain about? I think there are two things that he's uncertain about here. Have a think about that. What is he uncertain about? I think he's uncertain about whether or not he should kill King Duncan, and he's uncertain about whether he can actually see this dagger in front of him, whether it's a real dagger or a dagger of the mind. And leading on from that, he's uncertain whether the dagger of the mind is saying, stop it, Macbeth, or whether the dagger of the mind is saying, come on, get a move on, Macbeth, and go and do your murder. So I think all the questions he's asking are like questions that he's trying to put to the fates, like this fatal dagger that he sees, this fatal vision. Okay, right, so the first of the personification, he talks to the dagger, he addresses it as if it was a person, using the informal thee. Come, let me clutch thee, I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Why is he talking to the dagger as if it is a person? Don't know. If you have a look down here, when he grabs his real dagger, I see the yet in form as palpable as this, which now I draw his real dagger, this real dagger that he's drawing. So he calls the real dagger this, but he calls the dagger of the mind thee or you. So that's weird. Could it be because he thinks that the dagger is a vision that's been created by the witches? Could that be why he's personifying it? Is it because he thinks it's a message from the fates? So something in which in his mind does take human form? Maybe. I don't have a right or wrong answer to that. I think it's something that you could argue yourself. So if we have a look a little bit further down, he carries on talking about the dagger, which is leading him the way that he's going, that is towards killing King Duncan. And now he starts personifying all his senses. So he says, my eyes are made the fools of the other senses. So I've just put here in the annotation, his eyes are now also personified. Macbeth can see the dagger, but his hand can't touch it. And the way he says this, my eyes are made the fools of the other senses, it's almost as if the other senses, touch, taste, sound, and smell, are kind of ganging up on the eyes, are ganging up on sight and mocking the eyes and going, we're right, because we can't see or smell or hear anything. Sorry, not see. We can't touch anything, we can't taste it, we can't smell it, we can't hear it. You think you can see it? Yeah, whatever. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? They're kind of mocking the eyes, the sight there. So again, this is really highlighting his uncertainty and his confusion. We talked about the gouts of blood previously and how the dagger of his mind is changing. And then he says to himself, there's no such thing. So he's like, no, I don't believe in this air-drawn dagger anymore. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. And again, he's still not calling it murder. He's talking about the bloody business. That is the planned murder of Duncan. And if you have a look, he's using here this harsh B sound, this aggressive B sound. So it's a plosive consonant, bloody business. Bloody is a minor swear word, as well as meaning literally it's going to be bloody because there's going to be stabbing involved. Business, and he makes it sound really, really harsh there. So good use of alliteration. Now in the next one, we've got a motif that we're really, really used to. First of all, let me explain what it means. Now, over the one half world, nature seems dead. So what he's talking about there is the northern hemisphere, of the globe and the southern hemisphere. So in the northern hemisphere, where England is, it's dark. One half world, nature seems dead. So darkness, he's saying here, means death. And so we've got that motif of darkness. And as you know from Macbeth, evil only happens at night. That's when the evil takes place. So we've got the motif of darkness, which we know well. But more than that, Shakespeare has personified nature here. Nature seems dead. So darkness is already associated with death. So we can see this motif developing, and that's a motif that runs through the whole play. And then another one of our favourite Macbeth motifs comes up straight afterwards. Wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. So that motif of sleep again, which we have already actually tracked through the play, but that's come up twice in this scene, hasn't it? First of all, Banquo talks about being troubled by nightmares. When he tries to sleep, those dark thoughts about the witches come back and trouble his mind. And here Macbeth is talking about wicked dreams, when it goes dark and you fall asleep. You can't sleep properly because your mind is being abused by wicked dreams. And the curtained sleep is a metaphor, and the curtains to sleep mean your eyelids. That's what he's talking about there. So it's a really beautiful metaphor, but that contrasts with the idea of wicked dreams. Okay, so you probably want to pause and see if you can catch up with some of that annotation and then add in anything else that I've said that you want to before we look at the imagery and the language in the second half. Okay, so going on to the next line here, we've already defined Hecate. She's the queen of witchcraft. But here she's described as pale Hecate. And I think it's really interesting to note that pale equals light, doesn't it? Okay, it's a pale colour, a light colour. And this image of Hecate is really different to the one where we meet her in Act 3, Scene 5, where she's definitely a dark witch who's associated with black magic. And she's referred to at other parts of the play as Black Hecate, because she's associated with the darkness. But pale Hecate here is almost thinking of her more as the goddess Hecate rather than the kind of grimy, evil queen of the witches. Okay, so really different image of Hecate just here. But then Macbeth uses a word that he doesn't use very often, withered murder. So he's talking about what goes on in the darkness. Now, over the one half world, nature seems dead and wicked dreams abuse the curtain's sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder goes about his deeds, basically. So it's this list of all the evil that happens during darkness. So you can see that murder is being personified, so loads and loads of things being personified, as I said, in this soliloquy. And withered, we've heard the witches described as so withered and wild in their attire. Withered means kind of scrawny and skinny. So murder is being personified as a skinny, sinister figure. And withered murder has a sentinel or a guard, which is the wolf. And when the wolf howls, that's like the message to withered murder to go about his duty, like to go and commit the murder that he's going to commit. So as I put here, the wolf is murder's guard. It's the wolf, and he howls as a warning. So why has Shakespeare, or Macbeth rather, personified murder? although he is now using the word murder, he doesn't seem able to face up to the fact that he, Macbeth himself, is the agent of murder. It's almost as if this idea of withered murder, when you personify it, it becomes something which is abstract. It's something which is out of himself. So a brave Macbeth wouldn't be a murderer. It's almost like murder is something which is dragging him along and forcing him to do this deed. And he's not actually referring to his own deed. He's just saying these are some of the things that happens when it's dark. So although he's using that term murder, he's still not linking it to himself. He's abstracting it by personifying the idea of murder. He goes on and he compares murder, his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides. So stealthy means he's moving efficiently and effectively, but like with stealth, so he's moving quite silently. Ravishing strides means he really, really wants to do it. So murder really wants to commit this crime, which is being compared, as we've already discussed, to the rapist Tarquin. Murder is described as moving like a ghost. So really, really simple little simile in there, moving like a ghost. And that moving like a ghost links back quite nicely to this idea of murder being personified as a skinny and sinister kind of figure. It's like kind of unseen, the idea of murder. Now, the last little bit of language analysis is the double meaning going on just down here. So I'll read through this again. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabouts, and take the present horror from the time which suits it, which now suits with it. So he's starting to personify it again, and this time he's personifying the earth and talking to the earth as if it's a living thing. And within the earth are its stones in the ground. So that could be paving stones, or it could be, the actual stones within the dirt. And he's worried that his heavy footsteps will give himself away. So that's one meaning. His loud footsteps might give him away. However, this idea that the stones in the earth will tell your terrible story, was an ancient proverb which Shakespeare's audience would have known about. So kind of like a proverb's like a warning or a message to people, which is told in a story. And basically what the proverb says is, if you do something really bad and then you're skillful enough to manage to keep that a secret, so you kind of commit a crime perhaps, but you think you've gotten away with it, then the stones, like so the bricks in the house or the flooring, the stones in the floor, will tell the story. They'll tell the story for you. So it's almost kind of like an ancient folk tale, something like that, which Shakespeare's audience would have been familiar with. And you can see that here. The stones pray to my whereabouts and take the present horror from the time which now suits with it. So it's saying the stones in the earth, they know what's going on now, the present horror, but when the time is right for them, they will tell the story of what has happened now. And do you remember I said he's finishing up his soliloquy thinking about the mind-drawn dagger, and he says, whilst I threat, he lives. So he's saying here, while I'm kind of threatening and thinking about killing him, King Duncan's still alive. Words to the heat of these two cold breath lives. So here he's thinking, right, I really need to stop thinking about the mind-drawn dagger and start thinking about what I'm actually here for. Now, we talked about the bell ringing. That's Lady Macbeth. The coast is clear, off you go. I go and it's done. The bell invites me. Hear it not, Duncan, for it is a knell that summons thee to heaven or to hell. This is interesting, though, isn't it? Summons thee to heaven or to hell. That doesn't show much respect for King Duncan. So here it could show that Macbeth has got no respect for King Duncan. Now he's on his own, talking in soliloquy form. He's telling the truth. He's revealing his true feelings. So perhaps he's never really had much respect for Duncan, or perhaps he sees Duncan as his victim, because Duncan is going to be his victim. He is therefore beneath Macbeth, and that's why he'd be a thee, not a you. In the soliloquy, Macbeth personifies all of these things. He personifies the imaginary dagger. He personifies the eyes and the other senses. He personifies nature. He personifies his dreams or dreams. He personifies murder itself, the very act of murder. He personifies the earth and the stones within the earth. And then he personifies the bell. The bell invites me. All of those things he personifies. Why does he personify everything? My theory is that he is absolutely wrought with paranoia in this scene, and he kind of almost feels like everything, all these inanimate objects around him, almost kind of ganging up on him. And he's worried that they're either going to be with him, like the dagger has come to give him a good message from the fates that he can take forward, or he is worried that he's going to be somehow given away. So I think that they highlight his paranoia. You have a think about that and see if you can come up with your own interpretation. Okay, just jumped ahead a little bit too far there. So let's think. I don't think the soliloquies come up in an exam paper before, but I can really see it coming up in an exam paper because there's so much in there that you can analyse. But what might they ask you about if you did get that extract in the AQA Literature GCSE exam? Perhaps they could ask you about aspects of the supernatural, this dagger of the mind. That would be a really interesting question, because is the dagger supernatural or is it just psychological? And I think that Shakespeare's audience would have thought one thing. Yes, they probably thought it was supernatural, whereas a modern audience would be more likely, arguably, to think that the dagger is much more psychological. And bearing that in mind, they definitely could ask you about psychological aspects in this soliloquy. So they might ask you something about Macbeth's uncertainty about killing the king, or about Macbeth's paranoia. Okay, that would be quite tricky if they did talk about paranoia. You'd have to have a firm grasp on what being paranoid means. I think that thinking about all that personification, all those questions that Macbeth was asking, maybe something to do with guilt. Is Macbeth feeling a sense of guilt about what he's about to do in that scene? I think that might be a theme that the examiners might pick up on if they chose that as your extract. And then the other thing they might talk about, another theme or idea, is the nature of murder. So thinking about that murder, the way that it's described, and the way that Macbeth thinks about murder. He thinks that the murder is somehow in his fate and fortune. It's something that he is destined to do, and he can't wiggle out of that. He thinks that a dagger is coming to guide him and to lead him to the murder. He's thinking about how, like, what's the difference between murder and rape, and about the stealthiness of just claiming what you want, maybe without having a good reason for it. So it's something about the nature of murder. So what I've done is I've had a go at turning some of these ideas into some AQA worded exam questions. And so if you have a look just here, how does Shakespeare present the supernatural in this speech? How did he present the supernatural in the whole play? So remember, the questions always have that two-part structure, don't they? How does Shakespeare present Macbeth's uncertainty in this speech? How does he present Macbeth's uncertainty in the whole play? How does Shakespeare present Macbeth's troubled mind in this extract? How does he present Macbeth's troubled mind in the whole play? I like that one a lot. And then finally, the question I made up here, which could go really well with this extract, is how does Shakespeare present Macbeth's attitude to killing in this extract? How does he present Macbeth's attitude to killing in the whole play? Probably that last one sounds a little bit the least like an AQA question, but they might just word it a bit more discreetly and come up with something similar to that. So there's going to be 3 tasks for you to do, because we're nearly at the end of this lesson, or these probably 3 lessons it's probably taken you to get through. So the first task is have a go at making up your own AQA GCSE question in the form of these 2-parters here. So that's going to be your first task. So what you might want to do is just pause the video, so you've got these examples in front of you here, and have a go at quickly scribbling down a GCSE question. Then you can type that up for me a bit later. Next 2 tasks, you're going to choose these. Obviously, the challenge one is going to get you ready for your GCSE in English literature a lot better than the first one. Okay, it doesn't mean to say the first one's not challenging. It's just that the second one is asking you to spend an hour on it, whereas the first one you could probably do in 10 minutes if you set your heart to it. So we're going to focus on this question. How does Shakespeare present the supernatural in this speech? How does he present the supernatural in the whole play? So the slightly quicker option is to just focus on the imaginary dagger. So write a detailed paragraph about the imaginary dagger, so it could form a part of the answer to this essay title up here. What you need to remember to do is 1, pick out key quotations about the dagger and explain what they mean, like in the context of the play, obviously. Number 2, you could write about how the words about the dagger are acted out, those embedded, implicit stage directions that Shakespeare skillfully puts in there so that the actor knows how to act. You could refer to Patrick Stewart. You could bring in that social historical context that I gave you about the fact that actors would have to be performing a different play every day of the week, maybe on a 2 or 3 week rotation. Okay, so the way that Shakespeare tries to make it easy for his actors by putting those implicit stage directions in. And then thirdly, and really, really importantly, zoom in on the effects of language or the effects of structure. So you could talk about the rhythm there as well, but keep focusing back on how Shakespeare presents the supernatural. And you might want to think about, is it a real vision, if there's such a thing as a real vision? Is it a real ghost of a dagger? Is it really something the witches themselves might have conjured up and are dangling there for him, or something that fate has kind of conjured up and dangled there for him? Or is it purely psychological? And then when you, if you think about the second part of it, it kind of links in quite nicely to Banquo's ghost, I would suggest, but I'll talk more about that in the challenge. Okay, so the second one's challenge task, and that's to have a go at writing the whole essay. And if you have a go at writing the whole essay, try to include the second part of the question. You can do that separately, or you can just bring it all in when you're talking about the dagger and everything. What I'd like you to do, if you're going for the whole essay, is try and create an argument where you explain how some people think that the dagger is supernatural, whilst other people would argue it's all psychological. You could write about the psychology of murder in here. You could, as I said previously for the previous one, link it to the social and historical context and explain what Shakespeare's audience might believe, and compare the beliefs of Shakespeare's audience to the way that a modern audience might react with our really, really different kind of beliefs about witchcraft. If you're doing the whole essay, I don't think that you can write about every aspect of the supernatural in that. So what you might want to concentrate on is Banquo's ghost. Even though we haven't really studied that one in depth yet, it does link really well to the dagger. I think especially when you look at the way that Lady Macbeth talks to him, and tells him that he's just imagining the ghost, and she compares the ghost to the air-drawn dagger, which he'd clearly told her about before. You might want to talk about the witches, but I wouldn't talk about both Banquo's ghost and the witches. I think that's too much to fit in. If you talk about the witches, you might be able to say, well, obviously Banquo saw those as well, so they really are supernatural. Banquo saw them disappear. Banquo thought that they were hallucinating, having eaten of the insane root. So the witches does fit in well with the dagger, but almost in a way to kind of form a contrast, because we know that the witches are supernatural, and we know that the witches have been seen by Banquo. It's not just Macbeth and his head. Okay, so it is a challenge, number 2, and it will take you, if you do it in exam conditions, it should take you about an hour. If you want to have a really proper job at it, you maybe spend a couple of hours having a go at that essay, and that would be really pleasing, and I would really enjoy marking that and giving you some detailed feedback on that if you could have a go at that essay for me. Okay, so I think that's about it. I hope that you didn't try and do that all in one go, because that was pretty intense. And I hope that you really understand Act 2, Scene 1. Also, you know that I don't normally get the opportunity to go into so much detail on something. That was almost kind of A-level standard of detail there. But once I got into it, I just kept finding more and more. So hopefully, even though I won't always go into that kind of detail, it will give you lots of advice as to how you can seek out that understanding and that detail for yourself. Okay, so I will see you to talk a little bit more about Macbeth, probably another soliloquy next time. Bye bye.